This is episode 58 of the Why Not Me podcast. Let's rethink responsibility. I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And I believe when you know who you are, you can be the best you at what you're called to do. This requires faith, wisdom, and mental wellness. That's what we talk about here. Okay, I want to talk about something that has come up for me and comes up for my clients quite often, and that is responsibility. Specifically, but it's my responsibility to teach my children. So I'm talking mostly to Latter-day Saint moms here who struggle with feeling insecure, feeling inadequate, feeling, anxious, depressed, those kinds of things. And something that often comes up is that we talk about all the things we have to do, and they feel like these heavy burdens. And when I press my clients, well, you don't have to do that. You don't have to mop the floor. You don't have to make dinner. Then they say, oh, but it's my responsibility. And so for the past couple of weeks, I've been really thinking about this word and what does it actually even mean, right? And before I went to the Googles and looked up the actual dictionary definition, I had this sort of sense that when we are talking about our responsibilities as mothers, the word responsibility is actually the word obligation. And so then I went to the Googles and I looked up what is the actual definition, because you guys, this is something that I've struggled with too. Like it's my responsibility to do this or to do that or whatever. And it's like the reason why I can't let myself off the hook for the long to-do list and all the things that I think I should be doing or accomplishing, right? And when I really look at the definition, I'm like, I think we can rethink responsibility. So Merriam-Webster Dictionary says, responsibility is the state of being the person who caused something to happen. For example, in the sentence, he accepted full responsibility for the accident. The boys denied any responsibility for the damage to the fence. A terrorist group has claimed responsibility for the bombing. Those are some examples of how we would use responsibility in that way, of the state of being the person who caused something to happen. I don't think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about responsibility in motherhood. Definition number 2, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is a duty or task that you are required or expected to do. The janitor has many responsibilities. Mowing the lawn is your responsibility. I am responsible for teaching my children, right? This is the kind of responsibility we're talking about. The third definition, which I think is closely related, is something that you should do because it is morally right or legally required, etc. For example, we have a responsibility to protect the environment. The government's responsibility is to serve the public, right? The problem is that as mothers, we think that it's a moral or legal or some other kind of contract that we have signed up for as we're mothers, right? It's our responsibility to teach our children. Now, contrast this to the definition for obligation. Merriam-Webster again. Oh, so my computer's not scrolling. The definition for obligation is 1, the action of obligating oneself to a course of action, which I think this is a terrible definition. You're not supposed to use the word in the definition, right? But it's like the act of promising or vowing oneself to a course of action. Number 2 definition for the word obligation. Something such as a formal contract, a promise, or the demands of conscience or custom that obligates one to a course of action. for example, made an obligation to pay their children's college expenses. Another definition, kind of under this second definition of a formal contract, a promise, or the demands of conscience or custom that obligates one to a course of action, is like a debt of security, such as a mortgage or a corporate bond, or a commitment, like the government, to pay a particular sum of money, for example. Unable to meet its obligations, the company went into bankruptcy. There's the example sentence. Number 3 definition for obligation is a condition or feeling of being obligated. Ironically, here's the sentence. They felt an obligation to vote. Oh, I read that wrong. I thought it said felt an obligation to love for some reason. Number 4, something one is bound to do. Duty, comma, responsibility. Okay, so when we think of obligation, at least according to Merriam-Webster, it's really something that something is binding you to, right? But then we take that, and that's how we use it. When we're talking about the word responsibility, we are actually using the word obligation, but it's my obligation to teach my children. What I want to point out here is that who said it's your obligation? Did you consciously use your own agency to obligate yourself? Right? Did you sign some kind of contract? I hereby will always mop the floor at least once a week. Right? We talk about things like chores and church callings and teaching our children, or reading the scriptures, or teaching them the scriptures, or having family home evening. Like, I often see this in relation to things we think God expects of us. And I'm not saying that those aren't our obligations or they're not our responsibilities. What I am saying is that we haven't consciously obligated ourselves or consciously taken on the responsibility for those things. There are things that are handed down to us because of custom, or what was that one? Because of, I have to find it again, a promise or the demands of conscience, right? Because our conscience tells us so. And today, I just really want you to rethink your responsibilities, because you always have you always have responsibility. This episode is not turning out the way I had hoped. You always have agency, always, 100% of the time. It is part of Heavenly Father's plan for us. It's just that sometimes we think that we don't have agency. We believe that we don't have agency. We believe that we can't not do that thing. We can't not make dinner. We can't not take our kids to school or whatever, right? Now, there are a lot of things that come into play here, of like what other people will think, what God will think, what husband will think, right? There's that, and that's part of what needs to be addressed. But the part here that I want to address today is the part where we just take it on face value that, yeah, this is part of my responsibility. This is part of my obligation. And maybe it's not. Maybe you haven't actually exercised your agency to say, I will take on this responsibility. I will obligate myself in this way. We just look around and we absorb from culture, right? Whatever culture we're a part of, the implicit expectations. I kind of think that when we use responsibility in this way, like it's my responsibility to teach my children, I need to teach them how to be responsible. I need to teach them how to be good citizens. I need to teach them, to read their scriptures or whatever it is we want them to learn. We use it like a subconscious obligation. And all I'm saying here in this episode is make the obligation conscious. Make it explicit in your own mind and then choose it or not, right? I think this is my own personal thought, my own personal opinion, and this is my podcast, so I get to share it with you here. I think that so often we just sort of take on these responsibilities, these obligations, whatever word you want to use from now on. I think obligation makes it a little more explicit, makes it a little more conscious of kind of how you're using that word. But I think that when our responsibilities feel too heavy to bear, or we just are resisting them so much, that that's when we need to take a look at them. And we need to look at, do I really want this responsibility anymore? Do I want this obligation anymore? Now, if you have obligated yourself to pay a certain amount of money to the bank in exchange for owning a piece of property, for example, you could rethink that obligation. And you could say, I don't really want to pay this anymore. And there are consequences, right? You either need to sell your house or, borrow money or something. I'm not saying that there aren't consequences to rethinking our responsibilities. It's just that if we think, okay, I just have to pay this $1,000 a month, however much your mortgage is, I have to pay this because that's how it's always been. And this is what I do. I'm a mom, so I pay the mortgage. And then we go, wait, do I really want this? And if I let it go, what are the consequences? And am I willing to live with those consequences? Right. So I'm not saying that we can just let go of everything that we feel are responsibilities or obligations, but I am saying that we can consciously choose them, and that is so powerful. Okay. I had an experience. I feel like the longer I've been in this world of mindset work and coaching and, taking responsibility for our emotions and our actions and all of this, the less tolerance I have for doing things that I don't really want to do. And so maybe I think this was I think it was right before the pandemic hit. I just was like, I don't want to cook anymore. I hate cooking. I've been doing it for 20 years. The burden falls to me. And I understand this, that I was the stay-at-home mom, and it makes logical sense for the stay-at-home parent to do the bulk of the cooking and the grocery shopping and all of that. But like, I hate it so much. And so I had a conversation with my husband, and he was kind of like, well, what else are we going to do? Right. Like, this is the only thing. And I could be remembering this incorrectly, but I got to this point somehow through this conversation where I was just like, I'm just not doing it. I don't care. I don't care if we go out to eat every meal. I don't care if we just eat top ramen and toast all the time. Like, I just don't want to cook. And he kind of got mad at me because he thought that meant he had to cook. And that's not what I was suggesting. I was like, I think really what I was suggesting is I need a break. Right. But it was like, it felt so heavy and big. And like, I just had to like shirk it, like just get it off of my plate kind of thing. And so I was just like, I'm not cooking. And so he started cooking, and, he was not happy about that. And so I would be like in the house somewhere, in my office or wherever. And I was just like, I'm not cooking. Like, I'll have toast, or I'll have cereal or whatever. Everybody can just grab whatever. And so he would cook, and that went on for several days. And I noticed that I actually felt really guilty about not cooking, and um, that I recognized that I didn't want to do it, but I had to experience, I had to kind of like say, like, I'm not doing this anymore before I could experience the other side of that, right? Which is, okay, if I'm not going to cook, then husband has to cook, and he's working all day and he's cooking, and then I'm going to feel guilty. And like, I managed my mind pretty well. I knew that I had a choice. I didn't have to feel guilty, but I just did. Like, that felt like the next best thing. And so then it made me think, well, actually, I kind of want to cook. Like, I don't want this. Right. And so it was kind of this sort of pendulum swinging experience where the pendulum was way on one side. I don't want to cook. I hate cooking. I've been doing it for so long. I swung it all the way to the other side of like, okay, I'm never cooking. I don't care what we do. I don't care how much money we spend. And then the pendulum came back more to the middle, like, okay, I can cook. I can cook sometimes. It's not so bad. I just don't want to do it all the time. And I really don't like it. And if I'm going to do it, I want people to be like, thank you for cooking. Like I want some, I don't know, credit for it or something. But it was like something that was, it felt like a responsibility. It felt like an obligation that I never truly signed up for, right? It just sort of like fell to me because of the logistics of our life. And for a long time, I was fine with it. But then it just came to a point where I was like, ugh, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I had to make it conscious, right? I had to be like, I'm not responsible for this. I'm not obligated to this. I have not signed any kind of contract obligating myself to this. And so I'm going to let it go. And as soon as I let it go, I kind of realized that I don't really want to let it go all the time. I don't really like these other options. But for me, I really had to truly experience that. I had to like go through the motions of really allowing myself to not have that responsibility, right? I had to take my agency and use it and decide what is my responsibility and what isn't. The other thing that I have experienced this around is the whole it's my responsibility to teach my children, to do chores and to, I don't know, follow God's plan or whatever. In my mind, it's very much closely related to the gospel. And I have a kid who teaches me a lot. Let's just put it that way. And she just never wants to do her chores. And she's old enough to do her chores. And I think I was actually talking to some girlfriends of mine, and I was just like, I'm just so frustrated. Like, I feel like it's my responsibility to teach her. And that when she doesn't do what I think is my responsibility to teach her, that I feel like a bad mom, right? And a couple things. The first thing that I want to point out to you, this was not in my conversation with my girlfriends, was that there's a difference between having a responsibility to teach your kids and your kids learning that thing, right? We have to separate that out sometimes because we can teach and teach and teach. That doesn't mean the child or the student in this case is going to learn. And it's not our responsibility to force them to learn. In fact, we can't. There's nothing that we can do to force someone to learn something, right? And I mean, we see this at schools too, right? And just in our formal school setting, it's the teacher's job to provide the environment, the classroom, the tools, the information, but they can do that. And then students might still show up and not learn, right? So it's not the teacher's job to ensure the learning of the student, right? That's the student's job. And so as I was talking to my girlfriends this one time and kind of venting and in my frustrations, I had one girlfriend who said, well, I was exactly like that when I was your daughter's age. And it wasn't until I went to college and then I had roommates and I didn't have my mom there to kind of clean up after me and to nag me and to tell me where to put my stuff and where not to put my stuff that I like actually started doing it. And she's like, my mom taught me, like, I knew how to clean a toilet and put my shoes away and pick up my backpack and, whatever, cook some meals. It's just that I just never wanted to do it. And I never felt like it was really that important when I was living at home with my parents. And that conversation was like mind blowing to me because I was like, wait, I have taught her. She knows how to do all the things. And I really did create an inventory of what are the things I want to teach my children. And some of those things were gospel things like, what is obedience? What is repentance? Those types of things. And some of them were like, I want you to know how to wash dishes. I want you to know how to make your bed. I want you to know how to clean a bathroom. Those kinds of things that we as mothers get very caught up in in the chores of life, which is just so funny because that's just not really what life is about, right? I think it's because it's some external proof of whether or not we are doing a good job as mothers. And it was like this my girlfriend telling me like she'll figure it out, like you've taught her, it's fine. It was truly like a light bulb moment where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I have taught her." If I were to like pay her a high enough amount, if I'm like, "Come on over and show me that you can clean a toilet really well, I'll pay you $1,000." She would do it, right? She knows how. She has the actual skills. It's just that she doesn't want to. She doesn't care about it, and I can't force her to. And so I was able to let go of a lot of that, like, it's my responsibility to teach my children when I realized that I have taught them. And it's not my responsibility to make sure that they do the things I want them to do. Right. And there's a lot more to that. But when we're just talking about this word responsibility, I want you to really understand what it means to you. And I think for so many of us, what we really mean is I feel like I have an obligation to fill in the blank, right? So my challenge to you is to think about all the things that feel like responsibilities, and specifically the ones that feel like heavy responsibilities, because those are the ones you want to rethink. The ones that feel like responsibilities, but it's fine and it's fun and I'm okay doing it, those ones aren't a problem, right? And I just want you to make these responsibilities more conscious and I want you to choose them, right? So there might be responsibilities that you have that you haven't consciously chosen, but once you bring it to the conscious level and make it explicit, then you would choose it, right? And it shifts everything. Like the whole energy around what we do and why we do it shifts. When we say like, "Oh, I have to drive my kids to school." And then we go, "Wait, do I have to? Could I do something else? Could I pay someone else to drive them to school? Could I ask my husband to drive them to school? Could I like swap something like, here, you drive the kids to school and I'll do this instead?" Um, right? Like could we actually shift some things to get out of that responsibility and not feel guilty about it? And then when we realize like, "Oh, well, I could do that, but actually I don't really want to. I kind of like that time in the car with my kids on the way to and from school." Right? And so then as soon as we like see that we are choosing it, that we want to do it, it goes from I have to do this thing and it's so heavy and horrible to I actually want to. It might not be my favorite thing, but I still want to. Right? And so it's that shift in energy is so useful. So useful. And sometimes this can feel kind of tedious because there can be a lot of things that we've subconsciously put on ourselves as responsibilities or obligations. And we have to kind of pick each thing and look at it and kind of turn it around in our minds and be like, "Wait, do I really want to still do this? And if I do, what is my reason?" Right? That is part of being an emotional adult, is taking full responsibility and not just kind of going through the motions or doing what is just tradition, right? I want you to think of the word responsibility as the ability to respond, as in agency, right? When we feel depressed, when we feel incapable, when we feel inadequate, when we feel like we have low self esteem, we don't have any motivation, like whatever that is, that so many of us feel when we are mothers of multiple children and we have a household to run and we have church callings and, you know, things that we have obligated ourselves to. When we don't feel good, I know that's very broad and general and probably not super helpful, but when we feel yucky, we have less ability to respond. We have less agency. right? This is kind of the idea of debt that a lot of people have. When we get into financial debt, now we are like legally, contractually obligated to someone, to a credit card company or a bank of some kind, to pay a certain amount every month, for example. That means we have less agency over what we can do with our money because at least a small portion of our money, oftentimes a bigger portion of our money, is going to that person that we are contractually obligated to. And if we think about this in terms of motherhood, when we feel depressed or anxious or inadequate or overwhelmed, right, then we have less capacity to respond. We have less capacity to be the kind of mom we want to be. So I think that doing this work of looking at each and every task or job or whatever it is that we feel is our responsibility, and really choosing it or letting it go frees us up to be more able to act within our own sphere of influence. And it lightens our load. Like, I don't know, sometimes I think this is life's biggest challenge, right? Of exercising our agency in the way that feels good and aligned to us and in no other way, right? But life, culture, other people, whatever, you're going to get things thrown at you and you don't have to catch them. That's kind of the message I want to give you today, is that you are a mother with this giant backpack of things that you have put in there. And then like a lot of things that other people have put in there, and then culture has put in there, and right, like all these different layers. And what I'm just suggesting is that you empty out the backpack and you look at everything and you decide consciously, oh, I want this in my backpack and I want that in my backpack. I don't want those other things. Right? And then let them go without guilt. It is possible to do this, and it frees you up. It makes you feel so much lighter, so much more empowered. Just really look at with a critical eye at every single responsibility you have. And if you feel like, well, I couldn't do that. No, I couldn't let go of them. Like, just remember, why not me? Why not? What if it opens you up to being more of the person you were meant to be, to do more of the work in this world that is meant for you? What if finding your purpose and your passion is not so much about adding things to your backpack as it is about subtracting things from your backpack and allowing yourself the ability to run with that backpack on? That's all I'm suggesting. I hope that's helpful to you. That's enough for now, and so are you. If this episode made you think about yourself or others in a new way, would you please give it a rating and a review? And if you want to truly do the work of being the best you at what you do, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session with me. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.